You know, in the middle of all the headlines and the noise, there are two huge economic stories playing out side by side. And honestly, they seem to completely contradict each other. In one corner, you have a nation that's been hit with the most massive sanctions we've ever seen, and yet it seems to be booming. In the other corner, you have a continent that imposed those sanctions, and now it's struggling with inflation and an energy crisis. It's the great economic paradox of the war in Ukraine. But what we're going to explore today is how sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones built on an illusion, masking a much deeper and much more important reality. So this is the big question, right? It's the one that's been bouncing around finance ministries and newsrooms for over 2 years. It kind of makes you question everything you thought you knew about economic warfare. Now, on the surface, it looks like Western policy failed and Russia is just incredibly resilient. But the real answer? Oh, it's not nearly that simple. It's this wild tale of clever accounting, secret missions on the high seas, and a prize so huge it almost never gets talked about. To figure it out, we're going to have to dig deep, peel back the layers of government budgets, and track some ghost ships. Okay, let's get into it. These are the two narratives that have really taken hold. On one side, you have the story of Russia's defiance, the idea that sanctions don't work and the economy is proof of their strength. And on the other side, you've got this story of Europe, which in trying to punish Russia, looks like it ended up punishing itself, right? Tripping right into an energy trap that sent the cost of living through the roof. Our job here is to look past these first impressions. We're going to get into the data behind both stories to figure out what's real, what's just temporary, and what has been changed for good. So we're going to start our investigation in Russia with this economic performance that, let's be honest, left a lot of people scratching their heads. We need to figure out what this so-called boom is actually made of. Is it a solid foundation for the future, or is it more like a sugar high right before a massive crash? It really all starts with this number right here, 3.8%. In early 2024, the IMF projected that Russia's economy would grow by that much. Now, to put that in perspective, that's more than double what was expected in the US, and way higher than pretty much any advanced economy in Europe. I mean, you can see why that single number became such a powerful piece of propaganda. It screamed, "See, we're fine." But you know, in economics, a high number isn't always a good sign. Sometimes, it's just a symptom of a raging fever that's burning through the body's very last reserves. And here is the diagnosis from Russia's top economic doctor. Now, this isn't some critic from the outside. This is Elvira Nabiullina, the head of Russia's central bank. And what she's saying here is a crystal clear warning from inside the system. She's basically telling us that the fuel for this whole economic engine, it's gone. It's run out. It's a massive red flag that what they're doing just isn't sustainable. So if the growth isn't coming from a healthy economy, where in the world is it coming from? Well, the answer is right here in their federal budget. A jaw-dropping 41% of all government spending is going to defense and security. That is the highest it's been since the Cold War, and that tells you everything you need to know. This isn't a normal economic boom. It's a state-funded war economy. The government is just pumping unbelievable amounts of money into making tanks, missiles, and bullets. And all that activity, paying factory workers, buying steel, it all gets counted as GDP. It creates this illusion of growth, but it's a growth that only consumes. It doesn't actually create anything of lasting value. And of course, spending money like this comes at a huge cost to everybody else. There's an economic term for it, crowding out. The military's endless appetite for workers and materials is basically starving the civilian part of the economy, so factories that should be making tractors are now making tanks. And to pay for it all, they're cutting back on crucial things like pension funds. They've got a massive labor shortage because so many men are in the army, now 3% of the entire workforce, which is pushing wages up, but not because people are more productive. It's not building a stronger economy, it's eating it from the inside out. And here you can see what everyone agrees on, including Russia's own central bank. The party's over. After this artificial sugar high in 2024, the forecast for 2025 show the brakes getting slammed on. The IMF thinks growth will plummet to just 0.9%. The economy is just hitting a brick wall. The state can't print money forever. So that leads us to the next big mystery. If the whole domestic economy is a house of cards, how has Russia kept the money flowing to fund its war machine, all while dodging the biggest sanctions in history? Okay, now we're heading into the shadows. We're about to uncover this huge, complex, and incredibly expensive operation that Russia built not to make a profit, but just for pure survival. When all of its usual customers in Europe just vanished, Russia had to pull off one of the most drastic trade pivots we've seen in a long, long time. As you can see here, it looked east. China, India basically became its new economic lifelines, with China alone now accounting for over a third of its trade. Now, this was a massive logistical success. It kept the oil flowing. But that survival came at a very, very steep price. This is roughly how much money Russia loses every single day just selling its oil. Think about that. To get new buyers on board and, to make it worth their while to risk breaking sanctions, Russia has to sell its oil at a huge discount. We're talking like $15 a barrel cheaper than what everyone else is paying. Well, that discount adds up to about $75 million in lost revenue daily. This isn't a business plan. It's a fire sale, trading long-term profit for cash right now to keep the war going. And the main way they're pulling off this global fire sale is with something called the shadow fleet. I want you to picture a ghost armada of over 1,000 oil tankers. They operate in this gray area of international law. A lot of these ships are old, they're not well maintained, and they're sailing with sketchy insurance. Their entire purpose is to move Russian oil while hiding where it came from, dodging the G7 price cap, and making sure that cash gets back to Moscow. It's a massive risk, both financially and for the environment. And the tactics they use are straight out of a spy thriller. Captains will just switch off their transponders, which means their ships literally disappear from global tracking systems. Then, out in the middle of the ocean, far from anyone watching, they'll do these super risky ship-to-ship transfers, moving oil from one tanker to another, and to really hide the oil's origin, they'll often mix Russian crude with oil from other countries. It creates this new blend that's almost impossible to trace. It is a huge, coordinated effort to just ignore global rules. So this raises a really important question. Putting together a fleet of over 1,000 giant ships would normally take years and cost billions upon billions of dollars. Russia didn't have that kind of time or money. So how did they get this armada together so fast? Well, the answer reveals one of the biggest, most profitable ironies of this whole situation. Here's the truly shocking part. The tools Russia used to get around Western sanctions were mostly bought from Western companies. Yep. A deep dive into ship sales found that a huge number of these older tankers that make up the shadow fleet were sold by European firms, and Greek shipping companies were the single biggest sellers. It's this incredible conflict of interest where some companies inside the sanctioning countries made a fortune selling Russia the very tools it needed to break their own government's rules.
Are you preparing for competitive exams? Here's your chance to test your knowledge. Take part in our quiz on this topic and see where you stand. It's a great way to revise, practice, and boost your confidence. The quiz link is available in the comments section as well as in the description below. Don't miss it. Give it a try now.
Okay, so now let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this economic war. We're going to turn to Europe and the story of how a moment of huge vulnerability was turned into a painful but ultimately a strategic economic revolution. And we have to be completely clear here. The initial shock for Europe was intense. The perception of a crisis was 100% real. For decades, its whole industrial machine ran on cheap Russian gas. So when that tap was suddenly turned off, prices went through the roof. A cost of living crisis hit pretty much everyone. Inflation in the Eurozone shot past the US, and key industries, especially in Germany, saw production just fall off a cliff. It really looked like Russia's energy trap had worked perfectly. But that intense pain also became the spark for some incredible changes. Just look at this chart. In 2021, before the invasion, 45% of the EU's natural gas came from Russia. That was their dependency. That was the trap. But just 3 years later, that number has been slashed to 19%. This is one of the fastest energy realignments in modern history. They did it by building new import terminals at lightning speed and finding new partners like the US and Norway. And this is where you see the real long-term strategic win for Europe. The crisis didn't just force them to find a new gas guy. It was like a massive shot of adrenaline for the green transition. Before the war, the EU got more electricity from fossil gas than from renewables. Today, it's the other way around. In fact, in 2024, for the first time ever, solar power actually generated more electricity across Europe than coal. The crisis literally forced Europe to rewire its entire energy system. That is a fundamental shift that will define its economy for the rest of this century. But again, this transformation was not easy. The shock has left what some analysts are calling an economic hangover. Energy is still more expensive, and that's put a drag on growth that will probably be felt for years. So we're left with this really interesting picture. You've got the Russian economy being hollowed out to pay for a war, and the European economy paying a steep price to reinvent itself. Which brings us to our last and most important question. If both sides are paying such a high price, where are the actual, concrete, long-term gains in all of this? So in this final act, we're moving away from spreadsheets and inflation rates to uncover what is probably the single most important economic result of this war. And this isn't about economic activity. It's about the raw, physical takeover of wealth on a scale that's almost hard to wrap your head around. Just take a second and look at this number, $12.5 trillion. Now, this isn't some guess about future GDP. According to an analysis by the SecDev Group, this is a conservative estimate of the value of the minerals, metals, and energy in the Ukrainian territories that Russia has seized. This is the real prize of the war. And when you break it down, it is just staggering. Russia's war economy might be an illusion, but what it's gained is devastatingly real. Russia now controls over 80% of Ukraine's coal deposits. That alone is worth an estimated $12 trillion in the Donbass. It's grabbed nearly a quarter of its oil and gas reserves. And, so critically, it has captured land with key deposits of lithium. That's the mineral you need for batteries, for green tech, and it's something Russia itself barely has. This is the lasting economic win for Moscow, the physical theft of a neighbor's natural wealth. And this economic war goes way beyond just what's in the ground. Russia now occupies millions of hectares of Ukraine's Chernozem, some of the richest, most fertile farmland on Earth. That alone has caused over $80 billion in damages. And the deliberate destruction of infrastructure, like the Kakhovka Dam, which wiped out irrigation for a huge farming region, that's not just a tactic of war. It's part of a systematic, scorched earth strategy to permanently destroy Ukraine's ability to be a prosperous, independent country. And so we end here with this incredible contrast. On one side, you have an economy being hollowed out from the inside, trading its entire future for conquest. On the other, you have an economy that took a massive hit to accelerate a strategic, forward-looking change. And then there's a third economy, Ukraine's, that's being physically dismantled and its assets carried away. And it leaves us with a question that I think will hang over the world for decades. In this modern age of technology and innovation, what is the true long-term price of wealth that is simply seized by force, instead of being earned through creation and built through cooperation?